Hi, I'm Kirk Doolittle for the Proprietarian Institute. This is a sidebar, or what I usually call thoughts, that has to do with the method. So I want to answer the question succinctly: what's wrong with public speech, or what's gone wrong with public discourse? This is a little one-pager. Start out with our history. We've had a long history of producing truth. In other words, the pursuit of truth. It's not just the Greeks, it goes back before then. And it starts with reporting in the military. That's a very old tradition. Matter of fact, when you still go to the military, they'll tell you to report, soldier, which means testify. Tell me just the facts, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We also, because of this, our court's as old as what we think of as court, is as old as this tradition. We testify in court. We also give an oath or promise or contract. And when we are reporting, we were until 1950s, reporting on who, what, where, how, and why, which is testimony. We had trained each other to speak truthfully in public, and we had trained one another to confess in church. Now, this is an interesting spectrum because, when we say truth, we mean the empirical truth, or the reportable truth, or the observable truth. So, we developed there's three choices for civilizations, or there's a triangle, like many things are triangular in their number of forces. We had the truth faceless triangle. Now, Europeans, we practiced truth before face regardless of cost. East Asians didn't. They valued harmony over truth. And so they practice face. Doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. It means they're not telling you the truth. And then in the Middle East, in India, they developed a softer version of between the two of them, which was to avoid the unpleasant, which India has largely learned, but it's still a truth evasive society to some degree. Because empiricism is still a little harder for them. But the change in Indian culture has been phenomenal. It hasn't changed too much in East Asian culture. We'll see how that progresses over the coming years. The Middle East, on the other hand, chose facelessness, that it's honorable to cheat, lie, steal, whatever. And to some degree, that's still true in African tribal life. There is the expectation that male family members will engage in whatever necessary to bring resources to the family. So civilizations all developed somewhere on the truth faceless triangle, and Europeans alone developed truth before face regardless of cost. And that means the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which is what you're familiar with in court. But that's the positive version. The inverse means it's a prohibition on loading, which is when you and I add our emotional or value propositions to it. Framing, which is to create by suggestion a means of criteria for influencing your understanding of the facts. Suggestion, which is really what happens with framing. And obscurantism, again, what happens with framing. And the denial and deceit. So the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is asking you for empirical reporting or testimony. Now, this is the highest tax you can pay. I mean, it's incredibly high psychological tax. It's an incredibly high emotional tax. Status is what is the first after life. The status, which is what determines your access to discount on opportunities for cooperation. Well, that's a very highly valued thing among humans, and only Europeans seem to have been able to get to the point where we pay that tax. And because status is truth before face, status, the dominance hierarchy, the authorities that or your alliances, truth before those things is contribution to the commons, and this is what's separate about the West. I always think this is funny, is that we talk about individualism and freedom and liberty, but what we practice is commonism, the production of commons better than all other civilizations combined, because we pay the highest psychological, emotional, and status taxes, and we do that over the value of family and clan. So we've eliminated tribalism or clannishness more in the West than all others. That's why we're actually the least racist people on Earth, and why we're vulnerable to the attack using racism. So do reporters speak the truth before face? Well, if they don't, why not? I mean, it used to be that when you had Walter Cronkite and that era of person come on, they were still testifying. That's what a reporter did. He testified to you. He was supposed to use truth before face. The monetary incentive, though, turns out to have been overwhelming, especially as competition increased. So the dilution that happened, this was made possible by a couple of mistakes in our original Constitution, which is freedom of speech rather than freedom of truthful, testifiable, reciprocal speech. I think that this was also, but they wrote it during a period of the duel or fighting or honor disputes. They wrote it when the common law was still forcible, held its original force. So the common law originally limited us to duel over honor, to court over disputes, to markets for competitive survival, and it prohibited both the male and female methods of conflict and war. And so they produced harmony by confronting truth and settling it in public to keep the peace and not avoiding it. So this is the same thing that happens in the military. They're trying to get you to overcome your individual selfishness and take care of the soldiery, the same way that Europeans applied their original military concept to taking care of the community. In some places this broke down. Obviously, if you read Branfield's, is it Branfield? The Low Trust Society. Italy broke down and Sicily broke down more. That the opposite happened in Germany, which was created order, or what they think of as Ordnung. And the French sort of tried to waddle in the middle because their desperate pursuit of feminine authoritarianism. And the East was not. The East had the problem. I can't keep saying the East was behind because they didn't have transport like we did in the West and access to land, so access to waterways, access to seas, access to trade, so they were behind in the spread, and this allowed for the Germans and the Jews to move east and use their advantages. The Germans, although you got to understand that there's parts of the world where they talked about Germans, or what they call them, the group of Germans, and the way relatively modern people talk about Jews, which is that they were financial scoundrels. Well, this is true, but they also had the only trust system. So, in any event, the dilution of our common law, which prohibited male and female forms of conflict, and they forced us to have open, honest disputes to resolve that conflict as a means of maintaining harmony without what happened in the rest of the world is evading of the truth and not correcting behaviors. So the most interesting part of this is that the women's method of warfare, which was undermining, gossiping, shrilling, reputation destruction, was prohibited as well, and it would get you in the stocks just as easily as drunken brawling would get a man in the stocks. And unfortunately, we didn't maintain with our prohibition, with our license for free speech, we didn't contain the ability to use female means of warfare in the modern age, and that's really what's opened the door to the industrialization of not only lying, but the industrialization of the female method of warfare by gossiping, shrilling, canceling, undermining. And in particular, they broke the common law requirement that since we limit ourselves to duel, to public resolution of differences, to court for disputes, and to markets for competitive survival, that we had once again licensed undermining. In other words, we left behind the coherence of the common law that made us all handle things truthfully and reciprocally, and didn't allow the possibility to use undermining, whether physical or verbal or violence or information, to destroy the harmony of a civilization from within and conduct warfare from within against the people. So, the beautiful part of Western civilization, our origin, is kind of funny. We started out as a universal militia. I mean, there's not a lot of the negative version is pirates go out and they develop democracy and meritocracy and rule of law because they have to. Well, there's the positive version of that is when you get a bunch of families together, you collect your herds and all your wagons, and you collectively go out and form an entrepreneurial expedition to leave behind the waterways, go out on the steppe, and conduct and entrepreneurially govern these families who all have common interests. They're all shareholders. So we think we invented shareholding in the corporation. No, we've been practicing it since we invented Western civilization or the Indo-European civilization on the steppes of Ukraine and Russia. So the European plain. So we've been doing this all along. It's not that we practice. We have these wonderful words like democracy and liberty and freedom, but what we really mean is that we built an entrepreneurial society and entrepreneurs can only be governed, invest their assets. The only way to govern an entrepreneurial society in the absence of authority is to defend it with a militia, to practice rule of law, and to conduct entrepreneurial warfare. Entrepreneurial warfare, which is what is expensive, right? The cart, the horse, bronze, these were expensive things. This is what led to the Indo-European expansion, is this combination of techniques. The side effect of this combination of techniques is now you have distance. You can move quickly between time periods. You can conduct raids. We became very good raiders. And cattle basically turned into cattle raiders, which the Irish only abandoned, a few centuries ago. So it was kept alive for a long time. And so this entrepreneurial warfare turned into what we think of as democracy, rule of law, and freedom, but it's really just entrepreneurship. It's the absence of authority by people who invest their property in the production of commons from which all benefit. And the price of that is you can't privatize any of those commons. So that's what Western civilization is not individualistic, it's commonsist. So it's not communism, it is commonsist. We produce commons. What happens when you produce commons is that the cost of everything goes down. So if you have a neighborhood or a village or a city, and you have extremely high regulations on behavior, what you do is you can reduce the cost of everyone being in it if you produce parks, and you reduce the cost of producing private land. If you produce defense, you have reduce the cost of producing private defense. You have courts. So all these things lower the costs. We tend to think of how do I have more, but the way we have more is always to lower costs. When we cooperate in large numbers, we create time. We think we're making more of it. What we're doing is we're reducing the cost of all time. So that's what cooperation does. It creates time. And more time leads to more consumption of time, which leads to more consumption and production. So in any event, our people start out as a universal militia, not an army. An army is a state authoritarian, but a universal militia. So when you hear Europeans saying, God God, Constitution, family, and guns, they're actually saying they're actually repeating 5,000 years of Indo-European tradition, which is we're a militia. In other words, we are insuring one another. The entire body of people insures one another. You insure people by force of arms. If you don't have that force of arms, you're not capable of entering the contract for mutual insurance. You have the European TriFunctionalism, which is that there's a law in the middle, which balances it, the military on one end, or the masculine capitalizing, and the family and faith on the other, that makes sure we have enough consumption and redistribution, and this is European TriFunctionalism. But the foundation of that European TriFunctionalism, the pillar that it stands on, is the militia that guarantees the right to self-determination by self-determined means to every member willing to reciprocally defend every other member against it. So we created a universal militia, not an army, not a cult, not a corporation, not a village, and not a family, but a militia. And what the beautiful part of building a military order is that you don't have to create artificial means of developing membership or status. Because in an army, in a militia, in an organized military, every single person, if they do is dependent on every other person doing their duty, holding formation, bearing costs for the commons. So this is an ancient tradition. It's our 5,000-year-old tradition. And this is why you actually want a militial system, is because the officers must respect the linemen, and the linemen must respect the officers, not because of their rank, but because they have responsibilities at that rank for making sure we together produce commons. So again, entrepreneurial pastoralism led to entrepreneurial warfare, which led to entrepreneurial law, which led to entrepreneurial government, which led to rule of law, democracy, at least veto, oligarchy. So my point here is that the reduction of the failure to understand our ancient tradition, failure to understand the Bible, which is the law is our actual founding institution, failure to understand TriFunctionalism, failure to know what it was we were doing for thousands of years, incrementally expanding the application of it just like every other technology. We entered the 20th century and we allowed the industrialization of lying through the development of various kinds of media, whether print, radio, television especially, and entertainment media. I mean, fundamentally, every form of movie is mythology that alters the society, which is why, of course, the left dominates the media industry, and they produce films that only exist to support the narrative of undermining Western civilization, undermining truth before face, and undermining empirical civilization and everything else. So I don't want to go off on that rant right now, but I want to get to the point is that Walter Cronkite, I'm just pulling him out as an example, was by that time he was still testifying. If you go on to the news media today, they're not testifying. They're engaging in the female method of warfare, which is undermining reputation destruction and the destruction of institutional the institutions of cultural production, and undermining the patriarchy, meaning the hierarchy that makes those institutions that maintains those institutions of cultural production in order to conduct war against our civilization from within. The common law prohibited this. Under law today, it should be illegal for this to happen, and there's no reason we can't prosecute it. And if we help simply change our law so that you are required to speak truth before face, according to and under the criteria we give in testimonialism, but really it's just an elaboration of the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, the prohibition on loading, framing, suggestion, obscuring, denial, and deceit, which is, of course, sponsoring the anti-decivilization through the gated institutional narrative. Then we could actually fix this problem, because the minute you're liable for everything you say, once again, without creating a piece of testimony, in other words, and not engaging in suggestion, basically the media goes out of business. Secondly, that we defend their ability to lie to us by what's called copyright. Now, copyright wasn't. There is a value to Creative Commons copyright, which is that you can't profit from someone else's efforts in producing creativity. True, but there's no reason we have to preserve copyright. And in fact, if we preserved copyright for reporting, we removed copyright for copyright protections, as we've seen, we would actually collapse the ability by which the industrialization of lying is financed. Anyway, that's my 20-minute sidebar and one page that talks about the importance of testimony, where it comes from, the vast cost of it, and how it's been intentionally destroyed over the past 70 years by design. It's not just intuition. People, just like I'm telling you how civilizations are organized and how this particular warfare is conducted, or how to correct it in the law, there were people on the opposite side who said, how can we destroy Western civilization? How can we do to Western Europe and the English-speaking world what we did to Spain, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia? What can we do how can we repeat this by undermining again, like we've done in the past? But when you realize that, it's the same way that they destroyed the Roman Empire from undermining from within. There's a Jewish Christian destruction of the ancient world, and how the Muslims destroyed the ancient world and reduced them to ignorance, poverty, and ashes. Anyway, so that's my slide. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. My name is Kurt Doolittle for the Propertarian Institute, and I hope you have a wonderful day.